you guys are part of Design Buddies, make sure to join as well. Okay, so it's 6:33. All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to our Game UX panel hosted by Design Buddies community. I'm Grace. I founded Design Buddies this April and I saw it grow to nearly 10,000 members. So if you guys are new to Design Buddies, we are a really large and inclusive design community with a free mentorship program, events like this, resources, help, and any design critique for free. We plan to remain free and inclusive for all. And we're super excited to have our panelists, Alister, Andrés, and Andrea on from EA and Full Sail University UX Lab. And some general housekeeping stuff. I will be sharing a networking sheet in the chat shortly. And so you guys can drop your LinkedIns and connect with fellow buddies. And at the end, we will be taking a group photo and a waving selfie for our Instagram story. So now let's start with our questions. So we'll start with introductions. So Alister.
I'm first. Hi, everybody. I'm Alister. I am originally from Vancouver, Canada. I moved to the Bay for work, and I've been in the gaming industry for, I think it's been a while. And I have a background in graphic design and animation. I've kind of worked in a lot of genres and games through different platforms as well, mobile, PC, and console. Worked on war games, jackpot, casino games, and now I'm on the Sims 4 team as a UX designer.
Awesome, thank you. Andrea?
Hi everyone. So I'm an experienced designer currently working at EA. I'm original from Portugal and I moved to Vancouver, Canada about 6 years ago for studying, and I started working in games. It's about to be 5 years now. I kind of had a traditional path where I did study design, but then I just went and studied programming. And then I started in games as a programmer and decided I wanted to move back to design. So that's what I'm doing now, more focused in UX design. And that's a little bit about my background. And hi, everyone again.
Thank you. Andrés?
Hi, my name is Andrés. Born and raised in Colombia. I moved to the US 5 years ago for school, and I started working at the lab for my school, and they ended up hiring me long term. I've worked similar to Alister in games for PC, console, mobile, but unlike the two other guests, I'm a UX researcher.
Awesome, thank you so much for the intros. We'll get started with our questions, and throughout this panel, feel free to drop your questions as well. At the end, for the last 15 or 20 minutes, we'll be unmuting people who raise their hands to come up to the stage to ask some questions. So we'll start with some warm-up questions. How did you get started in games UX, and how did you know that it was the right career path for you? And we start with the same order and rotate halfway through.
Awesome. So my journey in games UX, so I went to school in graphic design, and we in school, we just learned, print design and publication. And I felt like I was just, getting an A for those classes, and that wasn't really my passion. I am like a huge gamer. I'm wearing like a Pokemon shirt right now. It's like my favorite game ever growing up. And I think when I was in school, I just never knew kind of my path. I knew I wanted to be in some sort of entertainment because I had a huge, obviously in games, and also I love anything interactive. Like I love going to Disneyland, I love doing all those, just engaging things. And my journey kind of started after I graduated. Sorry if you hear this weird noise. My dog has a coughing thing, so you might hear that in the middle. But anyway, after I graduated, I kind of did a whole bunch of random internships and stuff. And one thing that kind of really pushed me was I did one of these portfolio review sessions. It was pretty intense. It was one of those where um, it was like a group of us, and then there was like a panel of people, and they would be reviewing our portfolio on a projector, and they'll be like reviewing our projects. And I remember specifically one person being like, talking to me, being like, "You will never get a job in design." And it was like when I was so young in design, it definitely hurt a lot, but it also gave me this huge fire, and it like really pushed me to become a better designer. And because of that, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna try to prove you wrong. I like landed like 4 internships that year, and then kind of one of the internships was much more web-based, and then that's kind of how I started doing UI and UX. And with that, I got into games, with just that background, learning UX through the job, and have stayed in the industry for since then. So yeah, it's like a kind of sad, motivating story in the beginning, but I'm happy to look back and just be like reminded of that, that like, look at where I am now. So it's a great experience to remember.
I love that. Thanks for sharing. I had a very similar story. Love proving people wrong. It's always the best.
Yeah, handling
Andre-
rejection, it's its own skill
Yep,
set.
definitely. Andrea?
Hi. Yeah, so for me, like there's some similarity with Alister in the graduate school phase. But for me, I think most of my life until college, I didn't really consider games to be an industry I could work in, because it just doesn't exist in Portugal where I come from. And if you don't see it, you just don't think it's a possibility for you. So that's something that was never in my mind. It seemed like almost as becoming like a movie star. It's something they do in another country. You need to be really lucky to get there. Um, so yeah, when I was younger, I used to play a lot of games, mostly with my cousins that used to own more consoles. I used to have more dolls and stuff like that. I'd always be like, why do people gift me consoles? Um, and then there's this funny story when I was young that I really wanted a Game Boy to play Pokemon. And my mom was like, but it's called Game Boy. So, I mean, it's for your cousins, not for you. Anyway, so that was kind of when I was very young and I got a bit disconnected from games until college, where League of Legends came out and everyone was playing, even the non-gamer friends that I had. And then I started getting super into games again and playing WoW and Hearthstone and just like skipping classes to play League of Legends, but don't do that. But I did it. And at that time, I was kind of reconnecting to games and really enjoying it. And I had a class on interactive media. Again, like Alistair, my course was more like graphic design, print related, really not like going into UX or apps or anything like that. But we did have an interactive media class where we had to do a project about cybertext. And at the time, I was watching this YouTube channel um, about like that had this series about women tropes in video games. And I thought I want to make a game about this subject. So me and my group just did like this game that was talking through having you experience the tropes as man, a woman or a man. That at the time is what we were using to talk about it. And I just found like at that time, I've discovered games are more than just fun gameplay. They can be an interactive medium that you can really have other people express your point of views. And that like really motivated me to try to make more of games. So I finished my design degree, and I was looking to what to do next, because even design in Portugal wasn't really a viable job solution, because like any arts are kind of like expected to be free. So I was looking for education, and I found a scholarship here in Canada that was Women in Games, and I applied to it, and came here to study programming. So that's where I just started learning programming. I was like, programming seems fun. I'll be able to make my stuff move. And I did a 1 year in that. And then after that, I applied to roles as a UI programmer, which is kind of really hard to find. So I think it was like a kind of like a lucky way to get into the industry. And that's what I was doing for a while. Then I realized I didn't learn programming to just implement other people's ideas. I want to get back into design and just use it as a tool for my design day to day. That's where I changed back to UX and UI, which is where I am now. So it's about to be 5 years. I don't know if it's the right career, but it's a lot of fun. I guess I couldn't say like it's best than apps because I haven't been in apps, but it's really fun. The people they work with are super laid back. You play games together and you just make games every day. So yeah, it's pretty sweet.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Andreas?
Well, I didn't know what UX was at first, so a little bit of background. I actually have a bachelor's in engineering. I completed a 5-year degree in telecommunications engineering, and I have a similar thing with Alister, but not as harsh. Because one of my teachers was like, "I cannot for the life of me see you in an office job," and I was like, "You're right, you're right." But one of the main classes that we had was, I remember that we had to code a couple of games, and I've been playing games since I was very young. I was very sick when I was a little kid, so games gave me the opportunity to socialize with people and also to have something in common because I didn't do a lot of sports, and I didn't do a lot of other things because of health reasons. So that allowed me to be able to talk with people, get to know them a little bit better, also get to have a common interest and make friends. So then when I got to college, one of my multiple coding classes, they made us do like very simple games in C++. So I remember doing things like Hangman, Simon Says, memory, and all types of memory games for that class. And after I graduated, I was like, okay, what do I do with the rest of my life? And it's like, okay, the thing that I like the most about these 5 years of engineering school was making these games. This isn't very right. I don't want to be an engineer and be like, well, I don't want to do this anymore. So I started to look into different schools abroad, and similar to Andreia, and I ended up coming to Florida for game design. Then, to me, I found UX through serendipity. And Full Sail has a thing where if you do the game design masters, you have to intern into a different capstone. So we have things like, oh, you are going to become a game producer for the people working on their undergrad, or you're going to be working on the UX lab, you're going to be part of an indie studio, or you're going to work on VR projects for random applications. And I ended up going into UX because it was the perfect marriage between all my science degrees and all the physics maths that I did when it was in my engineering background, but also with all the cool things about knowing about game design, game production, on all the pipeline. And that's how I ended up in game user research. I've been doing this for 5 years. I was fortunate enough that my boss, a couple of months before I graduated, was like, "You want to stay?" Like, "I need a job. Like, I'll pay you." Like, "Cool, I'll stay." And I've been there ever since.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. I also came from engineering to UX. So our next question is kind of combining two questions. How do you guys think you developed and grown as a designer or researcher? Like, did you have any mentors or anything that helped you along the way? And as well as what are the favorite projects you guys worked on? And we'll go in the same order.
Sure. That's like a tough question. I think one of the biggest things for me was definitely the confidence thing. I have a huge like imposter syndrome. Even being in games for so long, I still have days where I'm like, I'm a fraud. Am I doing this right? It's just like this weird confidence thing where I still need to personally work on. But Another thing definitely is the whole, product thinking side of it, right? Like when you start off, I think when I was a junior designer, a lot of it was like, right, I have all these knowledge of, product thinking, and right when there's a problem thrown at me, all I would do was throw solutions at it till I was able to solve it. And one thing I feel like that I've grown in is, before solving it, ask why is it a problem, how is it a problem, and then when is it a problem, right? Those are like important questions as product designers, and I feel like it takes time to really have that intention when you do design something. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned, is just be patient with solving. I think that's, everything takes time, especially in product thinking. I think the best ideas come even when you're not actually physically working, right? Like a great example, sometimes I'll be like, especially now working from home, I'll be like, working out, I'll like take a shower, and then in the shower be like, oh my God, I have the best solution. Like, it's just like a great way to, ideas come all the time. Second part of the question was my favorite projects. I have two favorite projects. Can I talk about two? One of my first favorite projects is working on Sims Mobile. Obviously, it's on the phone, and why I love it is because I was pretty involved with the whole production of it. I was pretty involved in the pre-production. Was collaborating with game designers, PMs, engineers, like the whole team, really in the conception of it. And I personally have a animation background, so I love creating storyboards. So all I do while we're brainstorming room, I'm like on the floor drawing, what I imagine this feature to look like. This feature is kind of like it's almost like a to-do list, like a timed to-do list. And that's kind of like how I process things, is just drawing. And what my favorite part of it was, so I'm also a dancer on a hip hop team. And while this character, when you do complete the whole tasks in this to-do list, you're actually, this character kind of dances around, and I actually mocapped, the art team actually mocapped me dancing in it. So some of the dance moves are actually me dancing in the character. So it's like pretty cool that, one thing I've learned from that is just like being super proactive, right? If you really care about your work, you should care about all parts of it, not just finding the solution, but also work with art, working with engineers, right? If you have to be pretty involved and show that you're proactive. And one thing I always tell people is, when you're a UX designer, you have to be a good person to work with, because you're working with everybody all the time. You're never working solo. You're working, with in a very collaborative team, right? That's my first project. Second project is I'm currently working on this right now because, 2020, and where all companies now are starting to reflect on how to be more inclusive and diverse. One of the main projects, it's actually much more of a research project I've been working on, is how do we create a more inclusive and diverse design guide, using them as a kind of guidelines to really reflect, our in our work, right? And one thing I've learned for that is, I feel like as designers, especially in games, we have kind of a social responsibility to kind of create a very inclusive and diverse experience for all our players, right? Not just, culture and identity, sexual orientation, but also, accessibility, and all in that spectrum. And I feel like, especially for The Sims, we have a huge player base. I think we have like a 3 billion player base as of this year, and all ages. And the fact that, as designers are creating these features, we get to kind of show our players kind of like how they perceive the world, and how that they belong in this game, right? And I feel like that's kind of like one thing I've learned, that we actually have so much power when we feel like we're in this cog, but like we actually have kind of a responsibility to make the game industry better, the world better. I could talk about this forever, but I could, but that's it. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Andrea?
Hi. Yeah, so I guess I'll echo a little bit Alister on the imposter syndrome. Totally something that happens. Yeah, I think like when also maybe similar, like one of the things that I feel like I've evolved the most since I started is also the like asking why and really understanding the problem that you're trying to solve. Because when I was starting out, it was like, oh, I'll make this super cool looking UI, and it's kind of like just all flat screens. And then people will be like, what happens in this case? And I'm like, oh, it's going to take me like this much time to make a mock-up to show you what will happen in that specific case. So definitely like learning more about the why and solving for that, and not solving designing like the solution as you see everywhere else, was something that I've definitely evolved. Another thing is just the importance of prototyping and playtesting, which I think like in games it's been there for a while, but it's something that I've tried to bring to my work more and more. I find that getting to the first iteration of something is actually like the best way to unlock innovation and possibility space, rather than kind of just sitting at the whiteboard thinking of cool ideas, and as soon as you implement it they're not kind of fun. So kind of like the playtesting culture of games really fits together with prototyping mindset. Um, so for my favorite projects, they're actually like kind of related to that. I really like attending game jams, and just having like 48 hours to build something based on a theme, like just make something. And that's where like really fun ideas might come from. So yeah, like small projects, maybe somewhere on the internet, there's my game called Grounders, or the project I mentioned from school that it was female fatality. Yeah, so I really like work on those. Professionally, I'm just gonna talk a little bit higher level. So I've worked in small studios doing mobile, and I've worked in like AAA, doing like my last title was Plants vs Zombies Battle for Neighborville. And what I found is I really like the day-to-day on a smaller studio, because you're just working on more things, right? You can like now game design needs some help, you can do some game design, like art needs some help, you can do some art. So there's a bit more chance to wear more hats. But the games are also usually a smaller scope. In AAA, you can make games that reach so much more people and have scope and like a level of polish that is incredible. But with that comes a bit of more challenges about like collaborating with others, planning work for people that you might not even interact with. So yeah, smaller projects were more fast paced, but bigger projects, you just make obviously something bigger that reaches more people. Yeah, and I guess that leads me to one other point about something I've evolved in, is like collaboration with others, and not assuming that the responsibility to come up with the design and the great idea is on me. It's more about laying out the options and the problems for the team, so that we can have everyone come to some cool innovative idea. Yeah, that's it for me.
Awesome. Thank you. Andreas?
Yeah, I think the common trend is that everyone gets imposter syndrome. Me being a researcher, usually people that go into UX research have backgrounds in psychology, anthropology, those type of sciences. So me coming from an engineering background, so I get a lot of understanding of things of, oh, this is the science and the math behind certain things. But as soon as they start touching the psychology or the human factors of it, at the beginning I was just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So some of my teachers ended up being my mentors for very very long periods of time, and that's how I developed the research skill. And also they made me read a bunch of different things, and to the point where a couple of them are like, if you could go to a PhD right now, you would be a really good candidate for it. So that has always encouraged me a lot, that they believe that I could get a terminal degree in this. Um, so I believe that what has helped me grow as a researcher has been mainly this is gonna sound really, really, really bad, but I've had a very sink or swim approach to this because we work with real life projects and real life clients even as a student. Usually something that happens is that I get thrown into different situations and the common thread is, you'll figure it out. So how I learned how to do things, for example, eye tracking, biometric data analysis, how to learn how I learned how to be a UX project manager, where situations where someone, in this case my boss, was like, you'll figure it out. I'll trust you. So being able to really accommodate with people and be able to kind of like sometimes learn on the spot, it's very, very useful. And it's something that helped me develop a lot. My favorite projects, I would have to say, that are those projects where I was put on that sink or swim situation, because I ended up with some really cool things that have helped me in my career. So, like I said, I learned how to do eye tracking just because my boss walked in with a random box one day and was like, I have a new thing. You go learn it. And then he just shoved the box on my face. I was like, okay, I kind of can't say no to you. So cool. And I learned that, and for a while I was the go-to person to do every single thing that was eye tracking related. Similarly, when it came to like project management and deal with stakeholders and with different teams at the same time, that was a sink or swim situation where my boss was like, "Hey, I'm gonna be leaving for 2 weeks. You're in charge." I was like, "What?" And that helped me with things like communications, improve my communication skills, improving time management, making sure that that thing, pretty much every single managerial thing that you can think of, that project put a test on me. I agree with everything that they've been saying so far. For us, in the UX lab we have two big mantras. It's number one is we're here to be useful, not to be right. So at the end of the day, if you're right but you're a douchebag, no one's gonna want to work with you. And that's mantra number two. We can teach you how to do pretty much anything, but no one can teach you how to not be a horrible person.
Yeah, very true. Thanks for sharing. We'll do one more game question and then head it to the industry question. So the last general question is, how has your experience as a gamer changed while working in games? Do you feel like you're more analytical of it? And how do you think your overall like gaming experience has changed after like working in design and research in games? We're going to same order for our next question. We'll flip-flop over.
It's funny that you asked that, because I kind of refer it to the game UX curse, because you definitely become hyper analytical. Is that a word? And like just like super critical of everything you play, right? Because a lot of what we do is kind of be critical of maybe our competitors, right? And like it's definitely hard for me to maybe sit through a game. Like right now I'm playing, yeah, it's true. Once you're a UX, you cannot UX. It's very true. Like I'm playing a lot of Animal Crossing right now. Well, I stopped and then picked it back up, but I'm not gonna say how many hours I put into it, but there's definitely like features in there that are super frustrating, and where I'm just kind of like, why did they design it like this? And even though I immediately have a frustration, I always go into the like, there must be a reason why they created it this way, right? Like an example is in Animal Crossing, if people who play, everything, they, digging and like hitting trees and stuff, everything is in multiples of 3. If you realize that, like hitting trees, it comes out at 3, and for some reason that number 3 actually like psychologically is like a very satisfying number, right? And it's very interesting to realize like there's actually been intention and thought behind these things. And it's that I still enjoy games, right? I still play games on the side. I still am very much versed in the gaming culture. I watch, Twitch streams on the side when while I'm working as well. But I feel like it has changed maybe my in terms of gaming, I am much more critical. I do, would sit maybe in the start screen for way too long and analyze like, why did they use this font? Or like, why is this? And they're just, it's kind of a curse, but it's fun because when I do talk to other, game UX designers, we all agree on the same thing and it becomes like a conversation. But yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Andrea?
Yeah. So for me, I think I probably have less time to play games that I play just for fun. Is also because like I tend to prefer like what's called lifestyle games. So it's just like one game that takes a lot of space. So it's hard to play multiple at once. And I usually play more games for research when I do have the time. And I think it's kind of similar to what Alister mentioned about wondering about the decisions behind it, but kind of like what I've been noticing the most, I think, when I played the last games that I've played through is it's just I really appreciate when something is like super polished and feels really good and like some UI transition is just nice. It makes me think like, how did they have time to do this? How did they like get this through the scope cuts and like kind of harnessed 100 people to make sure that this experience was like super cohesive and the flow felt really nice. Um, just now having that experience on like how hard it can be sometimes in big teams and having like a little bit of communication breakdown and it just takes so many multiple moving parts to get things done and like bigger titles less time to make them just makes me really appreciate when something is really nice because I know how much effort goes like into the last 20% of a feature, and when I see that in game I'm like, wow, like they just really like took the time to do this and like those small poly spots just make me like hope that next time I'll have time to do the same. Yeah.
Thank you. I also love lifestyle games. Andres?
The course is real. It happens, especially when you start. It's something that you have to learn to live with. So for me, because I do UX research sometimes, and because of the type of work that I do, I work more closely. So my job situation is more similar to an agency. So I don't see a game from start to finish, but sometimes I see like, oh, I'm gonna do a test this of this thing once, and I might see it in 4 months, I might see it in 6 months, I might never see it again. So I don't get that attached to a couple of games that we've done. Sometimes I get a client that does a bunch of testing with us, and when that happens, I actually stop playing games in that genre. So if I'm testing a mobile game, I notice that I stop playing a ton of mobile games in that regard. But something that I do is, for me, I started either listening to podcasts or listening to things I call them my brain switch off games. So are games that I barely think when I play them. To me, my two ones are FIFA and then, as of recently, Fall Guys. So for me, Fall Guys, I use it as an excuse for me to talk with one of my friends back in Colombia. We play that game for like an hour a day. We just chat about our lives, and that's it. And because I'm engaged in the conversation, I don't have I don't have the brain power to engage in a conversation, play the game, and also overanalyze the thing that I'm playing. So that's something that has helped me a lot. And yeah, with FIFA and other games, I just started listening to a podcast or listening to music, and that also helped me to not overthink things too much. But yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all, for sharing. Now we're moving on to our industry question. So our next question comes from our submissions is, how is a day in a life at work for you? It could be like a day in a week if every day is pretty different. We're going to flip-flop over. So we're going to go with Andreas.
For me, it changes from day to day. It depends. So usually my days are either one of three things: are designing a study and recruiting participants in order for us to do the test, actually running the test, or writing a report. So my day-to-day life is basically one of those streets. So you could pretty much be planning, execution, and then reporting. As of yeah, and as of very specific, it would depend. It would depend sometimes, and because we work with different type of people, we work also with different time zones. Sometimes our days get shifted a lot, but that's pretty much the general idea is one of those three things.
Awesome, thank you. Andrea?
I think there's like I'm gonna say like in weeks, there's kind of two types of weeks or sprints modes that I work in. So I'm quite technical, and I usually have like a design phase and an implementation support phase. So in the design phase is probably what you would expect. You find the problem, I wireframe solutions, I review them with stakeholders, um, see what is the scope on that, which decision we want to go with, and do a more detailed design to present to engineers. And kind of the middle, there's maybe like a week where I work with the engineers, we review designs, I answer any questions that they have or make supporting flows. And then going into an implementation phase, I usually implement most of my UI and UX flows myself in the engine. So I'll build the screens, hook up everything that I can myself, and I just interact with engineers so that they can build foundations and tools for me to use. And then if there's something more complex that I kind of have to hand out for them to just build a big chunk of the software engineering work, I'll just usually take some time to be kind of on call for any flows that we didn't account for, or any widget that they need they don't have right now. So I just kind of save some time to work at the same time as they work, and make things come together, or like put an animation that they're not gonna add, so that when they're done with their pass, kind of the feature is ready and already had my pass on it. Yeah, so it's kind of like those modes that I work with. One is very traditional design process, and then an engineering support.
Awesome, thanks for sharing. Alister?
So on the Sims team, we have a very similar process to, Andrea's process. It really depends on kind of where you are in this cycle. So if we're as a UI UX designer, you're kind of in the pre-production phase, the production phase, all the way to the launch, and so after. And it does go from brain whiteboarding sessions into like I said, they're like me sketching a lot of wireframe creation, a lot of rough wires. I feel like because of COVID now, everything has to be done remotely. So we're using a lot of online web-based software like Miro for whiteboarding. There's tons of like resource out there, and it's great how we have to adapt so quickly. I think it kind of makes us design in a way better because we are kind of forced to be more proactive in reaching out to people. So with that, we kind of wireframes. We do have a much more and I don't say like production process where we do have design reviews where a lot of our teams get together who are working on the feature. That's mostly where a game designer and a UX designer would be presenting kind of our wireframes. And that's kind of like where we have to be pretty thorough with our wireframes regarding like edge case and all that stuff. And we kind of go through this research process where we work really closely with UXR, where we make prototypes and test our features. From there, we do UI mocks all the way to implementation, very similar to Andrea, all the way to production. And when the game launches, we're still waiting. In case there are bugs, we're the ones fixing it. So I feel like as product designers, we're just I changed our title so much. I'm sorry, but like there's so many of this title. But we are pretty involved with the whole process. It just really depends on where you're at and what day it is, really.
Awesome, thanks y'all for sharing. So for the next 15 minutes, we're going to be opening up for audience Q&A. So raise your hand if you would like to unmute yourself and come on TV to ask your question. Or if you can't find a raise hand, just like DM me on Zoom. And so I see CP raise their hand, so I'm going to unmute you.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. So first of all, Grace, thanks for putting this on. Alister, Andrea, and Andres, thank you for coming and sharing your insights. I guess the question I have for you guys is, what's like the biggest frustration that you face as you go through day to day as a game UX person, and then how do you work to overcome that?
I'll go first. I think from a great example of that is when I was working in a more mobile gaming company where a lot of free to play games have this kind of like the dark side of mobile games where they have this ridiculous monetization, you know, loot boxes and all that stuff. And it's like a hot topic, right? And I think in terms of design, those are still important business goals, right? Like even though, you know, we have player frustration in, you know, having them spend more and more money, but in a more like a design sense, when we talk about kind of like design goals and like business goals, those are kind of things we also have to be thinking about, right? So it's like an example I gave earlier with the to-do list, that was a free to play game. And there was a huge portion of the design where I had to be thinking about where are we placing these monetization points? And part of the designer is it's like, you do have an internal kind of like, I want the experience to be better, you know, more important than the money. But in kind of like in seriousness, like you have to be making money for a company, right? So there's just, you do kind of hit a point where you're like, not like you're giving up on design. It's just more like, how do I prioritize these goals? And usually when, like I said in the chat earlier, it's like when people don't realize the UX in, you know, in terms of like monetization, that means it's good UX, and people start noticing these terrible, you know, UX things. That's when it's bad UX, right? So I think it still applies to product thinking, even though it's about like monetization.
Yeah, I can go next. I think for me, in the beginning was really like be frustrated that the team wasn't really clear on what my role was, and wasn't like really involving me from the start, or they weren't always asking me to do wireframes for every single thing. And I think how I kind of solve that, which I think is important, is just really educating your team and being proactive about showing what value we bring to the table. Once you show the value that you bring, people will start inviting you in, and you no longer need to kind of push yourself. Another thing that I found is I'm a UX designer, but everyone every day is making decisions that affect the game experience. So like I don't really own the user experience. So what I've tried is to facilitate. If other people need to express themselves, I give them the framework, like think from the player's perspective. You can do this exercise. Here's some tools to build super basic wireframes that clearly didn't come from UX team and clearly will not be taken as final design. But giving other people tools to contribute in the most meaningful way, because everyone's just going to make decisions that affect the game's experience all the time. So if you educate them about who's the actual user that you're working towards and how to think of things from a user's perspective, you'll kind of like have more time to do things that you're more interested in, and you'll know that people are making the best possible decision at any time. Yeah, so that's my experience.
Mine is a little bit more straightforward. I do client work, so that's probably the biggest thing. It's people being like, Uh, I know that you said that we should do this. I know that you have the evidence, but about that we should do this, but we're not gonna do this. I remember we had one project that we asked them for probably 9 to 10 months. Like, yo, this game needs a tutorial. Like, real bad. People are not understanding this. They gave lunch without a tutorial. So we're like, well, at the end of the day, you just have to understand that you do the best that you can. And something that has helped me has been telling people straight up, I gain absolutely nothing by making your game worse. I'm just trying here to help you. I'm trying to help you to make the best game that you can. So why don't you just help me help you help us, okay? And that's something that you should, and that plus you having a relationship with your client and being able to show expertise as well as understanding where they're coming from has been something that has helped a lot.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing. We'll probably have time for one or two more questions. At the last 2 minutes of this panel, we are taking a group photo and a group wave. So make sure to stay on. It'll be on our Instagram story. So stay on for that as well. So we'll take about a few more questions. So Alex is the next person who raised his hand.
Hi, I'm Alex. So my question is, what's the distinct or like the different nuancing as a game designer versus a game UX designer versus a web UX designer? Like, are there differences in terms of like thought process or strategies when you're doing designs? Because I know like in web, like there's a different way of interaction, and I want to know if there's some distinct thought process that you have as a game UX designer.
I can answer that. I feel like as a game UX designer, you have another layer of game design, another hat you have to wear. In terms of, and I haven't worked much in the web industry, but I feel like in terms of foundational, as generalized, product designer, you still have very similar design thinking process, right? It's just part of evaluating your problem is considering like the tech constraints and what platform, right? But when you're in games, you're kind of still thinking about like what genre of game is it? Is it a console game? Is it a mobile game, right? Those are, if it is a mobile game, right, those are in itself has its own sort of like, interactions, right? Like you have games that are more portrait mode versus landscape mode, right? Those are still things that you're considering. And it's kind of still related to the web, right? And you're still considering those things. So I feel like it's foundationally it's the same, right, as a product designer, but as a game UX, you're also designing games. And I think what's helpful is if you play a lot of games, you kind of also have to understand kind of basic game mechanics, basic game systems to really design for games.
Yeah, and I can add to that. And again, like I haven't worked much outside of games industry, so I'm gonna make some assumptions based on when I Google something about UX, what is hard for me to apply. So one thing I think is about how games are a lot more about entertainment and an experience that we want to engage you with for a certain amount of time, where apps and webs can be a lot more about like a specific problem that you're trying to solve for real people. So it's hard sometimes to frame things like that in games because you're trying to create a much bigger experience. So you can't really design the experience. You design a game that you hope, and through testing, hope that it creates that experience for people. But it's a bit more like a subjective sum of parts, and emotions and sensations and engagement that you're having with that experience that you're designing. So like, usually I always have a bit of trouble trying to narrow it down to one problem that we're trying to solve, although you can definitely, like if you know there's a certain feeling that you want to create in the player, you can frame it like how might we create this, but it gets like a little bit nuanced, and some I think some of the difference might come in that, like the entertainment versus like solution for lifestyle. Yeah.
Andreas?
I mean, I do research, so to me it's very different. I actually have the completely opposite thing. To me, research is pretty much the same thing. You just change your research questions, but research methods, different approaches, methodologies that you might be using, those are pretty much all the same. So whether you're testing a banking app or a social game, you can take a very similar approach to it. So that's something that I'm grateful for, is that I can take my skills and pretty much like, knocking on wood. I don't want to end up in a bank, but if I end up in a bank, uh, all of the research methods and everything that I've done, it's applicable. I just change my stakeholders. I just change the approach that I take for the research questions, and that's it.
Awesome, thank you. We have time for one more question. So Nishith, I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name. You're the next person who raised your hand, so I'll unmute you. Ooh.
I'm sorry. You can hear me now, right now? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. So my question is what kind of research you do before starting your designing? So like you play similar kind of games, or what kind of research questions you ask before actually designing your project? So it's kind of a research question.
Anyone can start.
I'll do it. You can just pretty much straight up ask. Like, you have stakeholders when you're dealing with different games. And for me, I just go like, by the way, what do you want to know about this? And that's something that could help. If it's a first iteration of the game, you could play the build that they provide you. For me, they provide me with builds, so I can play the build of the game that we're testing, or I can play similar games. And that's pretty much how the type of like game background research that I do for my projects.
Awesome. Cool. Do any of you guys also want to answer, or maybe not?
I can answer. Um, I think it really depends on maybe like a feature that you're working on, right? Like, I kind of like what I was saying earlier. There's anything that's kind of game related, maybe the genres related, can be helpful to. The Sims. I think we use maybe like Animal Crossing a lot. We use Stardew Valley a lot. It's like that similar kind of genre of game. But I feel like sometimes even in The Sims we have a talent system. When you become like a vampire, you like have a talent system. I'm not the one personally designed it, but I feel like there could be inspiration not just in video games, but also like in board games or card games. I feel like there's just so much games around us that there's always going to be something that's going to be inspiring, in terms of our day to day.
Yeah, kind of to add to that, I guess I'm just saying I'm adding to what Alister is saying all the time. But depends on what is the thing that you're currently designing. So if you're designing the system and the experience you might want to provide, you can look at apps, anything that is related to what you're trying to solve. But sometimes you're just already through that phase, and now you're just looking at interface solutions to interface with your system, and you can just narrow down to researching just a lot of different solutions for kind of the same interface that you're looking for. And at that point, you might be looking at more like visual styles that people have gone through, or interaction patterns and stuff like that. So also, like, your research might be related on the thing that you need to solve at the problem. Like, do you need to think of different systems, how they all work together? Then it can probably be much wider, but further down, you might be looking at specific references that are closer to what you're looking to build. So yeah, finding the opportunities to look at other industries and beyond games whenever possible is usually beneficial too. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. We're at our last 3 minutes left, so we're going to take our group photo. So I'll count down for everybody to turn on their camera if you guys want to be on our group photo, which will be featured on all of our social media. And for this group photo, I'll be looking both ways. So I have two computers open because I need to take the participants are hidden on my other computer. That's why. So just keep smiling until I say done. And I'm going to count down 10 seconds for everyone to turn on the camera. So 10, 9, 8, 7. Oh, also, after we do our photo, we're going to do a wave for our Instagram story. So make sure to follow @design.buddies on Instagram. And I'll drop our Instagram link as well. So 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, keep smiling because there's multiple pages. And I need to go on my other computer. All right, we are going to wave. So everybody make any motion. You can wave, you can dance, you can yeet, you can dab, anything you want. So this will be on our Instagram story. So make sure to follow us on Instagram, design.buddies. And just keep waving or dabbing or any motion you want, or even take out your plushies. Like I have a Rillakkuma. So yeah, take out any plushies. We're just gonna do a fun photo, a fun video for our Instagram. Yeah, I'll give it like 5 seconds for people to grab their plushies. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, keep waving until I go to the multiple pages. Awesome, thank you everybody for coming once again. We're at time, so all of you can join Design Buddies. Once you join, make sure to head to Rules Verify to gain access to all of 50 channels. This is just to ensure that it's safe and everybody reads the rules. So make sure to join Design Buddies and connect with all of our panelists. They're all mentors for Design Buddies as well. And make sure to connect with them on LinkedIn. They're all their information and links on their social media are on the networking sheet. So I'll share it once again. And join Design Buddies. We have a game UX channel. So if you guys want future events, let us know. We're actually hosting an event on November 30th with Celia Holden, the master, like one of the leaders in game UX. So make sure to keep out for that. So that's in the plan, that's in the works. So make sure to join Design Buddies and check out our announcements to gain access to that. And that event will be public in the next few weeks. So join Design Buddies. Yeah, Celia is awesome. I watched some of her talks and everything too. And yeah, she's one of the first people I learned about games in. And yeah, so that's all. Make sure to connect with our panelists on LinkedIn, on their social media, on the networking sheet, and join Design Buddies. And happy Monday, everybody. Get ready to tackle the week with hype. And comment and like comment your in the chat, write your energy level, like write hype if you're really hype right now, like exclamation hype, and let us know how hype you are. Awesome, very hype, very hype. Very, very hype. All right, very hype. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for all being hype. Join Design Buddies to keep up the hypeness in our server. So that concludes our panel. You're all welcome to go. And for the panelists, we'll stay on for a surprise for a few minutes for a quick debrief and a surprise. And thanks, everybody, for coming.